The crystal spire of Centauri Prime stretched into the purple sky like a giant's finger pointing at the stars. Inside its massive halls, representatives from 47 different species gathered for what they called the most important day in galactic history. The Universal Peace Accords would finally end all wars between the stars. Every major species had worked for decades to create this treaty. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat quietly at the human table. Around her, aliens of every shape and size filled the enormous chamber. The Vathi looked like walking crystals that sang when they talked. The Zephyrians moved as one mind in their flowing robes, speaking in perfect harmony. The ancient Chronari sat on floating thrones, their silver skin gleaming as they looked down on everyone else with 6 purple eyes. Sarah watched them all with careful attention. She had studied each species for years, learning their languages, their customs, and their secrets. Most of them barely knew humans existed. To them, humanity was just another young species that had learned to travel between stars only 200 years ago. They thought humans were cute, but not very important. The main speaker was Hierarch Zenth of the Chronari. His voice echoed through the chamber as he talked about the great wisdom of the elder species. He spoke about how this treaty would bring peace to every world. He talked about how younger species would learn from their elders and follow their guidance. Sarah looked at the treaty documents on her table. She had read every word many times. The treaty was beautiful on the surface. It promised peace, trade, and cooperation. But hidden in the complex language were rules that would stop humans from growing. Humans could only settle on certain worlds. They could only build certain kinds of ships. They had to ask permission from elder species before developing new technology. The other species thought these rules were fair. After all, young species needed guidance. They might cause problems if they grew too fast. The Vathi had suggested these limits to protect everyone. The Zephyrians agreed because their hive mind calculated it was logical. The Chronari supported it because they believed they were naturally superior. Sarah's team sat with her at the human table. There was Captain Martinez, a former military officer who now worked in trade negotiations. Dr. Patel studied alien technology and had discovered many secrets the other species didn't know humans had learned. Commander Johnson handled security and had been watching how other species spied on each other. They all looked calm, but Sarah could see the tension in their eyes. The signing ceremony began with great fanfare. Representatives from each species came forward to sign the massive treaty document. The Vathi sang a crystal song that made the air shimmer. The Zephyrians moved in perfect formation, each one signing at exactly the same moment. The Chronari floated majestically to the document, signing with tools made of pure energy. When it was humanity's turn, Sarah stood up slowly. The chamber grew quiet. All eyes turned to the human delegation. Sarah walked to the podium where Hierarch Zenth waited with the treaty. The ancient alien looked down at her with what might have been amusement. Ambassador Chen, Zenth said in his deep voice, humanity is honored to join this great alliance. Your species will learn much from your elders. Sarah looked up at him, calmly. Thank you, Hierarch. However, after careful consideration, humanity must respectfully decline to sign this treaty. The chamber exploded in surprised sounds. Crystal voices rang out in confusion. The Zephyrian harmony broke apart into chaos. Even the dignified Chronari showed shock on their silver faces. This is unexpected, Zenth said, his purple eyes narrowing. Perhaps you do not understand the benefits this treaty offers your species. We understand perfectly, Sarah replied. Her voice carried clearly through the chamber. We also understand what it would cost us. Humanity chooses to pursue alternative arrangements. Alternative arrangements. The Vathi representative stepped forward, her crystal body chiming with agitation. What alternatives could a young species like yours possibly have? Sarah smiled politely. That remains to be seen. We thank the Council for including us in these negotiations. We have learned much from observing this process. She turned back to her team. We're leaving. The human delegation gathered their materials. Calmly. They had brought very little with them, Sarah noticed. Just basic communication devices and personal items. Nothing important was left behind. As they walked toward the exit, other species began talking loudly. Some demanded explanations. Others suggested that humans were making a terrible mistake. A few wondered if this was some kind of negotiating trick. Hierarch Zenth's voice boomed across the chamber. Ambassador Chen, you cannot simply walk away from galactic civilization. Humanity needs the guidance of elder species. You will find yourselves alone and struggling without our help. Sarah stopped at the exit and turned back. Perhaps, but we would rather struggle alone than accept chains, even golden ones. You speak of chains. The Zephyrian representative stepped forward. We offer partnership. We offer wisdom accumulated over thousands of years. You offer servitude disguised as partnership, Dr. Patel said quietly, speaking for the first time. You offer to share your wisdom while forbidding us to develop our own. Young species often lack perspective, Zenth replied coldly. You see restrictions where we see protection. You see chains where we see guidance. And you see property where we see people, Captain Martinez added. The chamber fell silent at those words. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Sarah looked around the great hall one more time. Members of the Galactic Council, humanity wishes you well. We hope your treaty brings you the peace you seek. We simply choose to seek our peace elsewhere. There is nowhere else, the Vathi representative said. This is galactic civilization. Beyond our borders, there is only empty space and unknown dangers. Unknown to you, perhaps, Sarah said softly. With that, the human delegation left the Eldea chamber. Their footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. No one tried to stop them. Most of the species present were too shocked to react. Others were already dismissing the humans as foolish children who would come crawling back when they realized their mistake. Outside the Crystal Spire, Sarah and her team boarded their ship. It was a simple vessel, nothing fancy compared to the magnificent ships of the elder species. But it was theirs, and it would take them home. As their ship lifted off from Centauri Prime, Sarah looked down at the Crystal Spire one last time. Inside, she knew the other species were already signing the treaty without humanity. They would congratulate themselves on their wisdom. They would talk about how unfortunate it was that humans were too stubborn to accept guidance. They had no idea what they had just lost. Navigation, set course for Earth, Sarah ordered. Yes, Ambassador, the pilot replied. Standard route? Sarah shook her head. No, take us through the Kepler passage. It's time to go home and begin the next phase. Her team nodded. They all knew what the next phase meant. They had been preparing for this moment for longer than the other species could imagine. Humanity's real journey was just beginning. As their ship jumped into hyperspace, leaving the galactic core behind, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The other species thought they had just watched a minor diplomatic failure. They had no idea. They had just witnessed the beginning of the end of everything they thought they knew about the galaxy. The peace treaty would be signed without humanity. The elder species would celebrate their great achievement. And none of them would notice, for quite some time, that the foundation of their civilization had just walked out the door. 6 months had passed since the signing of the Universal Peace Accords. The galaxy celebrated what most called the greatest diplomatic achievement in history. Trade flowed freely between species. The elder races spoke proudly of the wisdom they had shown in creating lasting peace. But in the quiet offices of intelligence agencies across the galaxy, people were starting to worry. Commander Vash of the Vathi Security Council stared at the reports on his crystal desk. Each one told the same strange story. Human colonies, outposts, and ships were disappearing, not destroyed by enemies or lost to accidents. They were simply gone. The first report had come from the Rigel sector. A trading station that employed 300 humans had sent a polite message saying all human workers were returning home. The next day, the station operated with only alien workers. Everything ran smoothly, but something felt wrong. Then came reports from the Outer Rim territories. Human mining operations shut down overnight. Families that had lived on frontier worlds for generations packed up and left. Human merchants stopped coming to markets they had visited for decades. At first, the other species barely noticed. Humans were a small part of most operations. If they wanted to go home, that was their choice. But as weeks passed, the disappearances became impossible to ignore. Commander Vash touched his crystal fingers together, making a soft, chiming sound that helped him think. He pulled up a galactic map and marked every location where humans had vanished. The pattern made his crystalline heart cold with fear. It wasn't random. Humans weren't just leaving scattered locations. They were withdrawing from everywhere at once. Every human settlement, every human business, every human diplomatic post, all of them were shutting down in perfect coordination. Vash activated his communicator and called his counterpart in the Zephyrian Intelligence Collective. The Zephyrians answered as one voice, the way they always did. We see your concern, Commander Vash. Our calculations show a 97.3% probability that this withdrawal is coordinated. How is that possible? Vash asked. Humans don't have a hive mind, like you do. They can't coordinate billions of people across the galaxy without someone noticing. That assumption may be incorrect, the Zephyrians replied. We have been studying human communication patterns for the past month. They have been using methods we do not fully understand. Vash felt a chill run through his crystal structure. The Zephyrians understood communication better than any other species. If they were confused by human methods, something very strange was happening. Meanwhile, on the Chronary homeworld, Hierarch Zenth was receiving his own disturbing reports. His aide, a young Chronari named Keth, floated nervously beside his throne. The humans have evacuated their embassy, Keth reported. They left a message thanking us for our hospitality and saying they would not be returning. Good riddance, Zenth said, but his tone was uncertain. What of our trade agreements with human corporations? All terminated, Hierarch. Every contract was fulfilled exactly as written, but none were renewed. Human companies sent automated systems to complete final deliveries, but the systems will not respond to communication attempts. Zenth's 6 purple eyes narrowed. Show me the trade data. Keth projected holographic charts into the air. The numbers were disturbing. Human businesses had been quietly winding down operations for months. They had fulfilled every obligation but made no new commitments. It was as if they had been planning this withdrawal long before the peace treaty negotiations even began. Hierarch, Keth said quietly, there is something else. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected unusual activity in several uninhabited systems. What kind of activity? Large-scale construction, ships moving massive amounts of material. The energy signatures suggest industrial operations bigger than anything we've ever seen. Zenth leaned forward on his throne. Where? That's the problem, Hierarch. The activity is in systems we thought were empty. Systems beyond our normal patrol routes. We only detected it because we were specifically looking for human activity. On the trade world of Nexus Prime, Merchant Captain Theiss was discovering the real impact of the human withdrawal. Her cargo ship had relied on human-made navigation computers for 15 years. They were more reliable and efficient than anything her own species produced. But today, when she tried to update her star charts, the system displayed a simple message. Service no longer available. Please contact your local supplier for alternatives. Theiss tried to call the human company that had maintained her systems. The communication channel was dead. She flew to their office in the Merchant District and found an empty building with a sign that said, "Thank you for your business. Operations have moved beyond this sector." She wasn't alone. Hundreds of alien merchants were discovering that services they had taken for granted were simply gone. Human-designed cargo handling systems stopped receiving updates. Human-built communication relays went silent. Human technicians who had quietly maintained equipment for decades had vanished. The worst part was that most aliens didn't even realize how much they had depended on human services until those services disappeared. Humans had worked behind the scenes, fixing problems and improving systems so quietly that other species thought the improvements were their own work. Dr. Zira, a Vathi scientist, made an alarming discovery while reviewing her research files. For the past 10 years, she had been receiving anonymous tips and suggestions that had greatly improved her work. The messages came through academic networks and seemed to come from other Vathi researchers. But when she traced the communication paths carefully, she found something impossible. Every helpful message had been routed through systems that were now controlled by humans. The anonymous helpers who had advanced her research had been human scientists all along. Zira checked with her colleagues and found the same pattern everywhere. Human researchers had been quietly contributing to alien science for decades, sharing knowledge and insights while remaining invisible. Now that they were gone, alien research projects were slowing down or failing completely. The full scope of the withdrawal became clear when the Galactic Trade Commission tried to organize an emergency meeting. They discovered that the Commission's own computer systems had been designed and maintained by humans. Without human technicians, the systems were beginning to fail. Commissioner Aldark, a proud member of the Chronari ruling class, was forced to admit something humiliating. We cannot access our own financial records. The security systems were designed by human contractors. Without them, we are locked out of our own databases. Similar problems appeared everywhere. Power grids that had run smoothly for decades started having mysterious failures. Atmospheric processors on terraformed worlds began producing contaminated air. Space elevators that had never needed maintenance suddenly required constant attention. It was as if the entire galaxy had been quietly dependent on human expertise, and no one had noticed until it was gone. Commander Vash called another emergency meeting of the intelligence services. Representatives from 12 species gathered in a secure facility on the neutral world of Haven Station. "We need to face the truth," Vash announced. "This isn't just a withdrawal, it's an evacuation. Humanity has left our space entirely." "That's impossible," objected General Krex of the Rigelian Defense Force. "Where could 40 billion humans go?" "We monitor all hyperspace routes. We track all major ship movements." "Apparently we don't track them as well as we thought," replied Agent Seth of the Altarian Intelligence Service. "Our analysts estimate that humans have been moving people and resources out of our space for at least 5 years. Maybe longer." 5 years? Krex's scales turned pale with shock. That would mean they were planning this before the peace treaty negotiations even began. It would mean they were planning this before they even agreed to participate in the peace treaty negotiations, Vash corrected. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity hadn't walked away from the treaty in anger or disappointment. They had been planning to leave all along. The peace treaty negotiations had been nothing but a distraction while they completed their preparations. "We need to find out where they went," Vash said finally. "And we need to figure out how to function without them." "Why?" asked Commissioner Aldark, who had joined the meeting via hologram. "They were a minor species. Surely we can manage without them." Vash looked at the commissioner with something like pity. Apparently, Aldark, that assumption was wrong. Very, very wrong. As the meeting continued, reports kept coming in from across the galaxy. Human absence was causing problems no one had anticipated. Systems were failing. Trade routes were breaking down. Research projects were stalling. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humans hadn't been minor players in galactic civilization. They had been the invisible foundation that kept everything working, and now they were gone. The crisis began small, like cracks in a dam that no one noticed until the water started pouring through. On the Vathi homeworld of Crystallia, Master Artisan Zeln was trying to complete his most important work. He was growing a new crystal matrix for their planetary defense system, a delicate process that required perfect conditions. But something was wrong with the mineral processors. "The rare earth concentrations are incorrect," his assistant reported, her crystal voice filled with worry. "The processors cannot achieve the required purity levels." Zeln examined the readings with growing alarm. The Vathi had used these processors for 300 years. They had never failed before. "Check the supplier records. Who provides our rare earth elements?" His assistant's crystal form flickered through several colors as she accessed the databases. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "The primary supplier was Terra Mining Corporation, a human company." "What about secondary suppliers?" 73% of our rare earth elements came from human-operated mines. The remaining suppliers cannot meet our needs." Zeln felt his crystal heart grow cold. Without proper rare earth elements, the Vathi could not maintain their technology. Their crystal cities would begin to fail. Their ships would lose power. Their entire civilization depended on materials that humans had been quietly providing for centuries. Across the galaxy, the Zephyrian Collective was facing its own crisis. Their great hive ships, massive vessels that carried millions of Zephyrians through space, were beginning to break down. Swarm leader Epsilon floated in the central command chamber, connected to thousands of other minds through their mental network. But the network was filled with disturbing information. "The self-repair systems are failing," reported a dozen voices speaking as one. "Ship hull integrity dropping, life support systems showing wear beyond normal parameters." "Impossible," Epsilon replied through the collective consciousness. "Our ships repair themselves automatically. They have done so for 2,000 years. The repair systems were upgraded 147 years ago," came the response. "The upgrades were designed by human engineers working under contract for the collective." Epsilon felt the shock ripple through the hive mind. The Zephyrians had believed their technology was perfect. They had not realized that humans had been quietly improving it for over a century. "Can we repair the systems ourselves?" Negative. The human modifications integrated with our original technology in ways we do not fully understand. Without the original designers, repairs may not be possible. But the worst crisis was happening on the Chronari homeworld. Hierarch Zenth was discovering that his proud species had been living a lie for generations. The Chronari believed they were the most advanced species in the galaxy. Their technology was supposed to be perfect, created by minds far superior to any other species. But their greatest achievement, the automated defense system that protected their homeworld, was slowly failing. "Explain this to me again," Zenth demanded, his 6 purple eyes fixed on his chief engineer. Engineer Prime Korth floated nervously before the throne. The defense system has been operating beyond its design parameters for the past 50 years. It should have failed decades ago. Then why didn't it? Because someone has been maintaining it, making small repairs and improvements, upgrading components, replacing worn parts before they failed. Who? Zenth's voice was dangerously quiet. We don't know. The maintenance was done so carefully that our own monitoring systems never detected it. Whoever did this work understood our technology better than we do. Zenth was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow. How long do we have before the system fails completely? Perhaps 6 months, maybe less. The truth was spreading across the galaxy as species after species made similar discoveries. The Altarians found that their atmospheric processors were failing because human technicians had been secretly maintaining them. The Rigelians discovered that their space elevators were held together by human-designed support systems. The Centaurians learned that their food production relied on human-developed soil treatments. It was worse than anyone had imagined. Humans hadn't just been participants in galactic civilization. They had been the invisible engineers keeping it running. Commander, Vash called an emergency meeting of the Galactic Council. For the first time in the Council's history, the Great Chamber felt empty. Where once there had been pride and confidence, now there was fear and confusion. The situation is critical, Vash announced to the assembled representatives. Our initial assessment was wrong. Humanity wasn't a minor species. They were integral to the functioning of our civilization. That's impossible, protested Hierarch Zenth, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. We are elder species. We have technologies humans could never understand. Apparently they understood our technologies better than we did, replied Commissioner Aldark. The Chronari official looked tired and defeated. My people have been reviewing our industrial records. Human contractors have been involved in virtually every major project for the past 2 centuries. How is that possible? Asked Swarm Leader Epsilon. We carefully screen all contractors. We only hire the most qualified candidates. Exactly, said Dr. Lith, a Vathi scientist who had been studying the crisis. Humans consistently provided the best services at the lowest costs. They won contracts because they were simply better at the work. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. The elder species had been unconsciously depending on human expertise for generations. They had hired human contractors, not as charity to a younger species, but because humans were the most qualified for the jobs. We need to understand how this happened, Vash said. How did humans become so integrated into our systems without us noticing? Dr. Lith projected a holographic timeline into the center of the chamber. We've been analyzing historical records. Humans began offering technical services almost immediately after making contact with galactic civilization. At first, they only did simple maintenance work, but over time, they took on more complex projects. The timeline showed a steady progression. Humans had started with basic repair work, then moved into system upgrades, then full system design. Each step had seemed natural and logical. No one had noticed the pattern until it was too late. They were learning, Dr. Lith continued. Every contract taught them more about our technology. Every project gave them deeper access to our systems. They studied us more carefully than we studied them. But why? Asked General Krex. What was their purpose? That's the question we can't answer, Vash admitted. We don't know if this was a deliberate plan or if it just happened naturally. Either way, the result is the same. Our civilization now depends on knowledge and services that humans control. The meeting was interrupted by urgent communications from across the galaxy. The Zephyrian hive ships were experiencing critical system failures. Va'ati crystal cities were going dark as their power systems failed. Chronari defensive installations were shutting down one by one. Without human maintenance, the infrastructure of galactic civilization was beginning to collapse. We need to contact them, said Commissioner Aldark. We need to negotiate their return. How? Asked Vash. We don't even know where they went. Then we find them, Zenth declared, though his voice shook slightly. We send scout ships to every system in the galaxy if necessary. We've already started, reported Admiral Kess of the Galactic Fleet. But there's a problem. Our long-range sensors are starting to malfunction. The navigation computers on our scout ships are experiencing errors. Even our search efforts are being hampered by the loss of human technical support. The cruel irony was obvious to everyone. They needed human help to find the humans who had left because they didn't want to help anymore. There's something else, Admiral Kess continued. Our scout ships have detected unusual energy signatures in the Outer Rim territories. Large-scale construction projects in systems we thought were uninhabited. Human construction? Asked Vash. We think so, but the scale is enormous. bigger than anything we've ever seen. And there are other energy signatures, technologies we don't recognize. The chamber buzzed with worried conversations. If humans were building something massive in unexplored space, using unknown technologies, what did that mean for the galaxy? We need more information, Vash decided. Send everything we have. Find out what humans are doing out there. But as the meeting ended and representatives returned to their homeworlds, everyone knew the same terrible truth. They were no longer in control of their own destiny. They were dependent on a species they had dismissed as unimportant, a species that had quietly become the foundation of their entire civilization, and that species was gone, building something new in the darkness between the stars. The search for humanity became the largest military operation in galactic history. Ships from every major species spread across the galaxy like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. The Galactic Council had mobilized everything they had, desperately seeking answers in the vast emptiness of space. Admiral Kess stood on the bridge of the GSV Harmony, the Council's most advanced exploration vessel. Around her, screens displayed the positions of over 3,000 search ships scattered across hundreds of star systems. It was an impressive sight, but Kess felt only growing dread. Report from Sector 7 Alpha, her communications officer announced. The Vathi expedition has found evidence of recent mining operations in the Kepler belt. Large-scale extraction, but all equipment has been removed. Sector 12 Gamma reports similar findings, another officer added. Rigelian scouts discovered abandoned construction sites near the Vega system. The sites show signs of massive industrial activity, but everything useful has been stripped away. Kess nodded grimly. It was the same story everywhere. Evidence of human activity, but no humans. They had left behind only empty shells and tantalizing clues. Admiral, her science officer called out, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Chronari Deep Space Monitoring Station. Put it through. The holographic image of Station Commander Vex appeared before her. The Chronari officer's usual arrogance was gone, replaced by barely controlled fear. Admiral Kess, we've detected something you need to see. Long-range sensors have picked up massive energy signatures in the Void Sector. Kess felt her blood chill. The Void Sector was the empty region beyond the galaxy's outer rim, where no stars existed and no species had ever ventured. It was considered uninhabitable and uninteresting. What kind of energy signatures? Fusion reactors, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. And something else. Energy patterns we don't recognize. The power output is enormous, far beyond anything in our databases. How far into the void? Approximately 40 light-years beyond the outer rim. Admiral, whatever they're building out there, it's huge. As search fleets pushed deeper into unexplored space, they began to encounter something that terrified them more than empty systems. They found human technology that shouldn't exist. Captain Thies, now commanding a Vathi search vessel, was the first to encounter one of the probes. Her ship was investigating an asteroid field in the outer rim when her sensors detected an artificial object. It's small, her science officer reported. Roughly spherical, about 2 meters in diameter. The material is unknown, but it's definitely artificial. Bring it aboard for analysis. But as soon as they activated their tractor beam, the probe came to life. It scanned their ship with energy beams unlike anything in their databases, then simply vanished. Not destroyed, not hidden. It just stopped existing in their reality. Where did it go? Thies demanded. Unknown, Captain. One moment it was there. The next it wasn't. Our sensors show no trace of it. Within hours, similar encounters were being reported across the search fleet. Probes that appeared from nowhere, scanned alien ships with impossible technology, then disappeared without a trace. The probes never attacked or threatened, but their presence was deeply unsettling. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Lith, the Vathi scientist, had been analyzing fragments of human communications intercepted by intelligence agencies. Most of the messages were routine business communications, but buried in the data were references that made no sense. They mentioned substrate mapping and dimensional anchoring, Dr. Lith reported to the emergency council session. These terms don't exist in any known scientific literature. What do you think they mean? Asked Commander Vash. I'm not certain, but the mathematical models associated with these terms suggest they're working with principles of physics we don't understand. They reference multiple dimensional frameworks and something called reality integration protocols. Hierarch. Zenth leaned forward on his throne, his 6 purple eyes wide with concern. Are you saying humans have developed technology beyond our understanding? I'm saying they may have developed technology beyond our current understanding of what's possible. The implications were staggering. If humans had made breakthrough discoveries in dimensional physics or reality manipulation, they weren't just hiding in empty space. They might be hiding in parallel dimensions or alternate realities. The most disturbing evidence came from the Zephyrian Collective. Their hive mind allowed them to process vast amounts of data simultaneously, and they had been analyzing every scrap of information about human activities over the past decade. The pattern is clear, Swarm Leader Epsilon reported to the Council. Human behavior became increasingly coordinated starting approximately 7 years ago, not just in obvious ways, but in subtle patterns that suggest external guidance. External guidance? Vash asked. What do you mean? Human actions began to align in ways that suggest they were receiving instructions or coordination from an outside source. The timing was too perfect, the coordination too precise for a species without a hive mind. You think they were being guided by someone else? We think they made contact with something intelligent enough to coordinate their entire species across the galaxy. The search fleets pressed deeper into the void, following energy signatures that grew stronger as they traveled further from galactic civilization. What they found defied everything they thought they knew about the universe. Admiral Kess's flagship was part of the deep exploration group that made the discovery. They had been traveling for 3 weeks into the empty darkness when their sensors detected something impossible. Admiral, her science officer said in a voice barely above a whisper, you need to see this. The main screen showed a region of space that shouldn't exist. Where there should have been empty void, there was a complex structure of energy fields and gravitational anomalies. It looked like a vast web or network stretching across dozens of light years. What am I looking at? Kess asked. We're not sure. The energy patterns suggest it's some kind of transportation network, but the physics involved... Admiral, this technology is centuries beyond anything we understand. As they watched, points of light moved along the energy pathways at impossible speeds. Ships, but not like any ships they had ever seen. The vessels seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in some other dimension. Can we intercept one of those ships? Unknown. They don't seem to be operating in normal space-time. They might not even be fully real in our dimension. The discovery changed everything. Humans hadn't just left galactic civilization. They had joined something else. Something so advanced that it made the elder species look like primitive savages. Emergency. Council sessions were called on every major world. The greatest minds of galactic civilization struggled to understand what they had found. The conclusion was terrifying in its implications. They're not gone, Dr. Lith announced to the assembled leaders. They're still here, but they're operating on a level we can barely perceive. They've become part of a transdimensional civilization. How is that possible? Demanded Hierarch Zenth. Humans were primitive when they joined galactic society. How could they have made such advances? They didn't make the advances, replied Commander Vash. They were recruited by someone who had already made them. Someone who saw potential in humanity that we missed. The search fleets continued their missions, but with growing desperation. Every day brought new evidence that humans had access to technology beyond galactic understanding. Worse, they seemed to be using that technology to watch their former neighbors. Reconnaissance ships reported being scanned by undetectable sensors. Communication networks experienced brief interruptions that suggested someone was monitoring all galactic transmissions. Most disturbing of all, several search ships had encountered what appeared to be human vessels, but the ships existed only partially in normal space. Captain Thiss had one such encounter while investigating a derelict space station. Her sensors detected a human ship approaching, but when she tried to hail it, her communications passed right through it as if it wasn't there. It's in the same space as us, but not in the same reality. Her science officer explained helplessly. They're here, but they're also somewhere else at the same time. As the search continued, the galaxy began to understand the true scope of their loss. Humans hadn't just been maintaining galactic technology, they had been quietly studying and improving it while developing connections to forces beyond galactic civilization. We're not dealing with a missing species, Admiral Kess reported to the final council session. We're dealing with a species that has evolved beyond our ability to understand or contact them. They've joined something vast and ancient, something that operates according to rules we don't know. The search fleets were recalled. There was no point in continuing. Humanity was gone. Not in the sense of being dead or hidden, but in the sense of having transcended the limitations of normal space and time. The galaxy was alone, struggling with failing technology and collapsing infrastructure, while their former, junior partners had become part of something unimaginably greater. And somewhere in the spaces between realities, humanity watched and waited, no longer bound by the limitations their former neighbors had tried to impose on them. The collapse came faster than anyone had predicted. On Crystallia, the Vathi homeworld, the great crystal cities began to dim as their power sources failed one by one. Master artisan Zeln watched helplessly as centuries of crystalline architecture cracked and darkened. Without the rare earth elements that humans had provided, and without the human technicians who had maintained their systems, Vathi civilization was dying. "The capital spire is failing," his assistant reported, her crystal voice barely a whisper. "The harmonics are becoming unstable. If we cannot restore power, the entire structure will collapse." Zeln looked out at the city that had stood for 3,000 years. The magnificent crystal towers that had once sung with pure energy were now silent and gray. His people had thought themselves masters of crystalline technology, but they had been children playing with tools they didn't understand. "Evacuate the lower levels," he ordered sadly. "Save what we can." Across the galaxy, the Zephyrian Collective was facing its own catastrophe. Their great hive ships, the massive vessels that had carried their civilization between the stars for millennia, were breaking apart in space. Swarm leader Epsilon floated in the command chamber of the failing flagship, her consciousness connected to thousands of dying minds. The collective was fragmenting as ship after ship lost life support and communication systems. "Hull breach in Sector 7, reported a dozen voices in desperate harmony. "Atmosphere venting, evacuation pods launching. How many ships have we lost?" Epsilon asked the collective mind. 47% of the fleet is no longer operational. 61% of our population has been evacuated to planetary refuges. The proud spacefaring civilization of the Zephyrians was being forced back onto the surfaces of worlds they had abandoned long ago. Without human-maintained technology, they could no longer live among the stars. But the greatest humiliation was happening on the Chronari homeworld. Hierarch Zenth sat on his floating throne in a chamber lit only by emergency power. Around him, the greatest minds of his species worked desperately to understand technology they had thought was their own creation. "The defensive grid is completely offline," Engineer Prime Korth reported. "The automated systems have shut down. Our homeworld is defenseless." "How long?" Zenth asked, his voice hollow with defeat. 3 days, perhaps 4, before the atmosphere processors fail. After that?" Korth's voice trailed off. Zenth understood. Without the atmospheric processors, their homeworld would become uninhabitable. The Chronari, who had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, would be reduced to refugees begging for shelter on other worlds. The emergency session of the Galactic Council met in near darkness. Half the stations couldn't maintain power. The other half were evacuating as their life support systems failed. Commander Vash looked around the mostly empty chamber and realized he was witnessing the end of galactic civilization. "The situation is critical across all member worlds," he announced to the few representatives who could still attend. "Without immediate intervention, we face the collapse of infrastructure on every major planet." "What intervention?" asked Commissioner Aldark, his image flickering as his communication system struggled to maintain the connection. "We've tried everything. Our own technicians can't understand the systems humans built. We can't repair what we don't comprehend." Dr. Lith's holographic presence was barely stable. "I've been analyzing the human modifications to our technology. They didn't just maintain our systems. They completely redesigned them using principles we never learned. They turned our primitive technology into something far beyond our understanding." "How is that possible?" demanded General Krex. "They were supposed to be the younger species." "Apparently, that was never true," Dr. Lith replied. "Our analysis suggests humans have had access to advanced scientific knowledge for far longer than we realized. They may have been more advanced than us from the moment they joined galactic society." The implications were staggering. The elder species had never been elder. They had been primitive civilizations propped up by human expertise, living a lie of superiority that humans had allowed them to maintain. It was then that the message arrived. Every functioning communication system in the galaxy received it simultaneously. Not transmitted through normal channels, but appearing directly in every computer, every data storage device, every artificial intelligence. The message was simple, delivered in every language spoken by every species in the galaxy. "To the former, Galactic Council, humanity acknowledges your current difficulties. We offer our assistance in stabilizing your failing infrastructure and preventing the collapse of your civilizations. However, this assistance comes with conditions. The Universal Peace Accords must be dissolved. The Galactic Council must be disbanded. Each species must accept responsibility for their own technology and governance. We will not return to serve as your invisible foundation. We will not maintain your systems while you take credit for achievements you did not earn." We will not accept limitations imposed by those who depend on our knowledge to survive. If you accept these terms, we will provide transitional assistance to help you develop sustainable technology appropriate to your actual capabilities. If you reject these terms, you are free to find your own solutions. You have 7 days to decide. The Human Collective, speaking for the Transdimensional Alliance. The message caused panic across the galaxy. The terms were harsh but simple. Admit the truth about their technological dependence, accept the dissolution of their government, and receive help becoming truly independent. Or reject the offer and face collapse alone. Hierarch Zenth was the first to respond, broadcasting his message from his dying homeworld. "This is intolerable," he declared to the emergency council session. "We are the elder species. We will not be dictated to by humans, no matter what allies they have found." But his defiance was undermined by the reality around him. As he spoke, another section of his capital city lost power. His own throne room was lit only by flickering emergency lights. Other species had different reactions. The Vathi held long, crystalline discussions, their voices harmonizing as they debated. The Zephyrians processed the decision through their collective consciousness. The smaller species watched and waited, knowing their survival might depend on the choices made by others. Dr. Lith made a public broadcast that changed everything. "Fellow beings," she said, her crystal form glowing with what little power remained to her recording equipment. "I have spent weeks analyzing the human message and the technology they left behind. I must share a disturbing truth." She paused, gathering courage for what she had to say. Humanity never needed us. We needed them. From the moment they joined galactic society, they have been supporting and maintaining our civilizations. They allowed us to believe we were advanced, while quietly fixing our mistakes and improving our technology. Her words sent shockwaves across the galaxy. They could have revealed this truth at any time. They could have demanded recognition or payment. Instead, they worked silently to keep our civilizations functioning while we took credit for their achievements. Dr. Lith's image flickered as power fluctuations disrupted the transmission. They are offering to help us become truly independent, to learn to maintain our own technology and govern ourselves without their invisible support. This is not a punishment. It is a gift. The tide of public opinion began to turn. On world after world, ordinary citizens began to understand the truth. Their mighty civilizations had been built on human foundations. Their proud independence had been an illusion. On the 3rd day, the Vathi announced their acceptance of the human terms. On the 4th day, the Zephyrian Collective voted to dissolve their membership in the Galactic Council. By the 6th day, 37 species had accepted the offer. Only the Chronari held out. Hierarch Zenth, floating in his darkened throne room as his world died around him, refused to admit defeat. "The Chronari bow to no one," he declared. "We will find our own solution." He never got the chance. On the 7th day, as the deadline approached, Chronari atmospheric processors failed completely. The proud species that had ruled the galaxy was forced to evacuate their homeworld in emergency. Shuttles, begging for refugee status on worlds they had once commanded. The response came at exactly the moment the deadline expired. Across the galaxy, human ships appeared in normal space for the first time in over a year. But these were not the simple vessels humans had used before. These ships existed partially in multiple dimensions, their hulls shimmering with technologies that bent reality itself. Ambassador Sarah Chen appeared via hologram in the ruins of the Galactic Council chamber. She looked exactly the same as when she had walked out of the treaty signing, but now she seemed to glow with an inner light that suggested she existed in more than 3 dimensions. "To those species who have accepted our terms," she said, "welcome to the next phase of galactic development. We will help you build sustainable civilizations based on your own capabilities and governed by your own wisdom." She paused, looking directly at the camera as if she could see every being watching. "To those who have rejected our offer, we wish you well in your chosen path. You are free to contact us again when you are ready to accept the truth about your situation." The transition took 5 years. Human technicians working openly for the first time helped alien species develop technology they